Well, as you know, for the last month and a half here at River Oaks, we've had a season where we have been working with a consulting group, the Center Consulting Group, and they have just done a phenomenal job of walking alongside us. They've been very thorough and having lots of conversations. And so this morning, actually, we get to have a special guest speaker with us. We have Billy Dunn. He's with the center, and he has just been phenomenal with working with every aspect of our church, with the elders, the staff, with the pastors and former staff. And so we've been very pleased. It's not just the work that he's done, but it's the heart in which he's done it. He's pretty much a modern day Paul. He goes to many churches throughout the nation and actually globally to be able to help them in times of crisis. And so we've been very appreciative of him, and we're definitely appreciated that he's here this morning. So Billy, I'd love for you to come up and...
Well, we'll see if that clap is deserved at the end of this time. Who knew that the Center of Worship Excellence is located right here in Elkhart County? Because the 6 people up on stage leading worship are some of the best I've seen, and I'm in a new church every week. I mean, that's incredible right there. And it's amazing. I can say that with even greater confidence because I love music. I'm just terrible at making it. So when you're not very good and you see good, you appreciate it all the more. It's so interesting that your church this past week collected close to 3,000 Operation Christmas Child shoeboxes. A number of years ago, I was in Russia, and we were setting up a sports trip for a sports ministry that a friend and I started called Push the Rock, and we had the privilege that week of delivering shoeboxes into different communities outside of Russia in a city called Bryansk and Dyatlov, and we happened to be committed to arriving at an orphanage. I think it was like a Wednesday, and we told them we'd be there at 2 o'clock. And we'd hand out the shoeboxes at 3, and we arrived at 2. The kids were already in the orphanage auditorium. And I kind of said to the director through a translator, like, did we get the time wrong? And she said, no, just, our kids are so hungry and anxious for what you're giving them because we have nothing, that they've just been sitting here for 6 hours waiting patiently for you. I don't know how 4, 5, and 6-year-olds sit for 6 hours on wooden chairs patiently, but when we delivered those shoeboxes, I wish I could bring the picture I have at home. There happened to be 3 kids up front sitting there, and if you could see the delight on their face, if you want to know whether the gospel moves forward through a scrunchie, colored pencils, and a Matchbox car, it does. And that's incredible. As a matter of fact, that trip led my wife and I to adopt a little boy from that orphanage. And I went home and told her first, just so you know. I didn't just bring him home. But it was a 3-year process of navigating that, and what an incredible time. So fast forward then just a few months that summer, we take this basketball team to Romania for a week and Russia for a week, and we're doing like testimonies at halftime when we have this wordless drama group from YWAM that's with us, and all this ministry is happening, and we were playing in front of 3,000 or 4,000 people. The testimonies had ended, and we happened to be staying in a hotel, I kid you not, and had just one active shower, okay, which when you have 30 people, that's troublesome. So 5 or 6 of us decided to kind of get back ahead of time, and we were 4 blocks from the arena and 3 blocks from our hotel. About 40 thugs jumped us and gave us a pretty good beating. The picture I can remember is we had a guy who taught shop class. So if you're a shop teacher, I want to talk to you afterwards. But he had some guy in a leg wrap. He had another guy in a neck throat hold. I mean, it was incredible. But here's what's amazing about that story. That night, I just really didn't know what to do. I didn't know if we should stay or if we should go home. So I called every parent who had a young person under the age of 18, so they knew exactly what happened from me. There was no speculation. There was no whisper down the lane. They heard it directly from me. And when we had the opportunity to circle back together, every person on that team and every parent said, I think you should stay because God has something. And obviously for Russia, that was a really embarrassing moment. And so I have a picture in my office, not only of those 3 kids receiving these Operation Christmas Child shoeboxes, but I have another photo of me with 3 guys on either side, some of them with really sharp gold teeth, and our arms are around each other. And you know what they're holding? They're holding Bibles. because we would share the gospel 3 times a day. And for an entire week, some of the highest people in government, police, and KGB espionage activities were assigned to be with us. And the gospel went to these individuals that would have never happened. God did an unbelievable work. And this morning, the title of this message is The Wonder of Possibility. So I will be here tonight and tomorrow night to talk about maybe where you've been a little bit, but this morning is really to talk about where you're headed. It's about navigating through these seasons of difficulty, because these are the places where we see the power of God released in the most impossible ways. As a matter of fact, you probably have studied this passage before. But if you have your Bibles, I'm going to ask that you turn with me to James chapter 1. And my hope this morning is that, myself included, that we would not just be hearers of the word, but God is actually giving you an opportunity, what? To be doers of it, to actually do what you have studied probably for many years. So take a look, James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. It says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. And perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." Let me just be really direct with you. I did not graduate from seminary. I didn't graduate with my graduate degree and go, man, I hope to work with churches that are struggling. Like, I hope that's the direction I go. But over a series of events and circumstances, including teaching at a seminary and starting a couple of successful ministries and then being on staff at a large church for 9 years, it kind of all came together. And I would hope that this morning that you would hear that in this place of what seems impossible, God actually says, no, I actually see more possible than you could imagine. That they become the places of possibility, and God uses these in powerful ways in our lives. And Paul found the wonder of possibility that we're going to talk about in just a second. But when you read James chapter 1, and it says kind of pretty quickly to consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, not just one kind, not just financial, not just relational, but many kinds that come our way. That what? That we would lean into this season, because perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. I will just be the first to say, I believe God is actually taking you through a season because there's something amazing on the other side. There's something incredible that is coming. And I want to talk about that in just a second. So I played soccer in college. It was great. And my best friends just simply said I was just really awkward at times. And it wasn't the most pleasant word, but it probably is true, because there are 3 things that I love. I love river dance, you know, the Irish dancing. Seen it like 15 times, probably more if you ask my wife. I love art, and I love the Philadelphia Eagles. So for me, don't boo. Any Eagles fans? Okay, none, great. But anyway, so a perfect day for me would be like 4 hours at the Philadelphia Art Museum, an afternoon river dance show, and an Eagles game at night. Like, if you could pick the perfect day for me, and that is my bucket list. But of those 3, art moves me in ways like nothing else. For me, it provokes a unique response with each look. It gives my mind 1,000 words and 5 words. It takes me to places where I wonder, like, what was the artist thinking? What was happening in their life? Why the color lines here? Why how big? Why how small? What were they thinking? What was the intent behind their picture? So last summer, my wife and I were in Amsterdam, and I was going to absolutely go see my favorite painting of all time, A Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh. Went to the Van Gogh Museum. You can see it right here. Just so happens that I went to Amsterdam to see this, and it was in New York City, just an hour from my house. But if you look at this painting, you have to know that Van Gogh wanted to be a pastor. Like, as you track the history of Van Gogh's life, he wanted to be, maybe in more technical terms, he wanted to be a minister, but he had mental health issues. He struggled in ways that actually brought him to an asylum. So he's kind of like, I want you to picture him looking out at the countryside through maybe barred windows. And this is what he sees, but it's not nearly as dark as what he paints. It's more a reflection of where he was in his journey. And here's the best part about his painting. The darkness of the way in which he painted is the very thing that allows the yellows and the whites and the light blues to what? To pop, to stand out. And I think in our lives, maybe life is the same way, right? Maybe when we look at this picture, the darkness of Starry Night is how the brightness stands out. The power of the yellow comes as a result of the darkness of the blues. And this is life out of hardship, out of difficulty. Life blossoms possibility. Life blossoms opportunity for kingdom advancement that we would have never known was going to exist. Opportunity comes about. Potential is increased and unleashed. Hardships are an accelerator to what God is doing. And so this morning, before we get into our primary text, I want to suggest to you that out of James chapter 1, there are 3 ways for those of us who are congregants to respond in this season. There are 3 ways. Number 1 is what I'm going to call improved self-awareness. Hardship accelerates my own self-awareness. Hardship forces me to come face to face with who I am. Hardships and the experience of it reveals limitations, patterns of sin, belief in skills I didn't see or appreciate in myself. It's a shift in awareness. It's the opportunity right now, today, this moment to say, I might not know much, I might know a lot. But how do I look in the mirror first and ask, Lord, what do you have for me in this season? What are you asking of me that I might not have seen had we not gone through this season? One of the things that we do at the Center Consulting Group is we use a tool called a Leader 360. And it's basically a feedback tool that takes a leader. I'm going to use Aaron as an example. We're not doing this. He's not in trouble. I just want to use him as an example. So we would come in and say, okay, Aaron, give us 10 people who are kind of like above you. It might be the elders. It could be his boss, something like that. Let's have 10 people who are kind of leading with you. They're side by side with you. And give us 10 names of people who are under you. And then we send them a survey and we ask them to answer a series of questions about what it's like to be on the other side of Aaron. Then we take that data, that information, and we sit with him or we sit with the individual we're working with and we kind of share with them maybe some of the blind spots that they're not aware of. Some of the things that there might be blinders to. We bring an increased awareness to how people perceive him, but most importantly, this thing, ready? What is it like to be on the other side of me? Right? So what's it like to be on the other side of me? If my wife was here right now, she'd be like, slow down, it's going to be okay. Right? What's it like? Like sometimes I have to be mindful of that. And so James chapter 1 declares this. It improves self-awareness because hardship brings us face to face with who we are. Number 2 is it increases compassion for others. A significant dose of humility typically comes out of hardship. It is never easy to confront the truth that we're not perfect, invincible, or immune to tough and terrible things, but going through hardships can often open our eyes to others. I grew up in a single-parent family. My dad left when I was 6. My sister was 4. By the time we were 13, we had moved in with my aunt. It was me, my mom, and my sister living in one bedroom together. We were on like the CHIP program, welfare, free food, all you can name. In 8th grade, our middle school would make you go down every Monday morning to get like a slip that would allow you to eat lunch every single day for free. And for 2.5 months, as a 12 or 13-year-old, I did not move because I was so embarrassed. I was embarrassed to know that in a school where most kids had mom and dad, it was just paralyzing. And I can just tell you, I don't know exactly when, but it was early November. Guess what just started to happen? I was hungry. And hunger actually won out. And I made what I called even today the walk of shame from Mr. Zook's homeroom class down to the office where they would give you like the coupon book for your free lunch that week. And I only tell you that because my compassion for serving single moms and maybe even single dads is much higher than maybe others. Why? Because I walk that road. When I was on staff at Faith Church, I had this idea that I was going to reach out to some single moms and kind of grab all of their kids, and me and my son Bryce, who happened to be 12 at the time, we were going to take them all to a hockey game. So it was me, Bryce, and 13 kids, like 8 to 12 years of age. Don't ever do that. because I spent more time, hey, I got to go to the bathroom. Hey, I'm hungry. Oh, now 2 people have to go to the bathroom. Like, it was an absolute disaster in some ways, but I was just trying to express like the love that I had and the compassion. Why? Because I had experienced what that was like. And then this third one that comes out of this passage is this idea of resilience. So when you see perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature, it's really simply saying perseverance is resiliency. It's a willingness to lean into this season, to be committed to what God is doing, even though hardship exists. And surviving hardships allow us to move forward and build added strength to tackle new challenges. And you study the New Testament, and you learn the life of Paul. He, to me, represents this so well. You know, we live in a time when the church is needed more now than ever. And yet, the church has less trust amongst the people outside of the church than any other time in history. People trust the church less and pastors less than at any other time in history. We're going through difficult seasons. There are culture conflicts. Here's an example of what's happening just when it comes to music. A group of executives in the music industry gathered together in New York City, and their purpose was to come together and ask this question: how do we remove the violence and the sexuality and the craziness that exists in music? And after 3 days, their conclusion was simply this: to do that would mean less revenue, and we're not going to do that. And so the very thing that we think is positive is actually attacking our kids and our young people. And so here Paul comes to the scene, right? And in Acts chapter 8, we see like his life as the great Christian persecutor. In Acts chapter 9, we see Paul on the road to Damascus. We can read through the Pauline epistles and Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, and Colossians and see these deep and theological truths. We can go through the book of Romans and understand in Romans 3:23 that for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. All of us. We can read through Romans 5:8 or Romans 6:23 that God demonstrated his love for us, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. We turn our attention to Romans 10:9, where it says, if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be what? Saved. Confess and believe. We can go through all of this richness, but if there's one statement that would kind of exemplify Paul and the way that he lived, it was this one found in 2 Corinthians 11:30, and this is his words. He said, if I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness. Like, if I'm going to talk about something that I've done, if I'm going to talk about something that has been good in my life, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to boast about my weakness. I'm going to boast about the difficulties that God has taken me through. If you know more about this passage, he kind of unpacks, being beaten, being whipped, being in prison, being shipwrecked, being hungry, being naked. All of the difficulties. And he says, no, I'm going to boast in the things that show my weakness. And so this morning, I want to speak to a passage that points us to the wonder of possibility. What it's actually like to go through hardship and look at things on the other side. It is easy to dwell on the past. And it's not that we shouldn't. But when you dwell on the past, you have to believe that God wants us to work through it and walk through it for something that's even better in the future. So if you have your Bibles, your tablets, if you own something like this that has paper, you can open it to Acts chapter 17. And this is where we are going to spend the majority of our morning. So if you kind of just take a look at Acts chapter 16, Acts chapter 17, Paul's in Thessalonica, things aren't going very well. He gets moved to Berea, things aren't going well there. He kind of is ushered in the middle of the night to Athens. He arrives alone, and so you kind of pick up the story at that point. But it's important to know that Athens was the heart of Greek culture and thought. It was kind of the place where people brought ideas together. Like it was an incubator of entrepreneurship. It was renowned for its art and its philosophy, and some of the most famous philosophers of our world kind of came out of Athens. And the city had reached its prime 500 years prior to Paul arriving. So under the reign of Pericles, which is kind of during the same season, 500 years before, when Nehemiah is kind of in the picture in the Old Testament, and also Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi were ministering as prophets. It's that same city, but it's no longer the population center of the world. It's no longer the population center. The population of Athens in Paul's day was probably under 10,000 people. But it was still an incredibly symbolic area for culture and learning. And what drove Paul to preach the gospel in Athens is the idolatry that he was very much familiar with. And so possibility finds opportunity even when God is not important. Take a look in verse 16 of chapter 17. It says, while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. The concept here is that is important to focus your attention on is, what does it mean to be greatly distressed? Do you maybe feel the same way when you look at the way culture is moving that seems to be taking more steps away from Christ than at any other time? I want to speak to those of you who are between the ages of 12 and 22. If you're not in that age group, literally you can check out or go on Facebook, okay? But I just want you to know, if you are between the ages of 12 and 22, you are dealing with one of the most difficult cultures our world has ever seen. It is not easy in any way. And for anybody to tell you, as a middle school student, a high school student, a college student, well, this is how it was when there's nothing like this season. Nothing like it. And there is nothing more that our culture would like to do than to direct you away from a relationship with Jesus Christ. And that really comes with the church as well. I would suggest that if River Oaks is not reaching young people, it is the beginning of the end. If you are not actively finding ways to engage the heart and the mind of a 12-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 22-year-old, then it's the beginning of the end. Because for those of us who have lived a while, we now get to look back and say, how do we lift up those who are coming behind us? When I was on staff at Faith, we launched a young adult ministry, and the first night, we had 300 young adults show up. Within 8 weeks, there were 500 coming. And I remember begging to go and preach. And at that point, we had like a traditional service. We had 3 contemporary service. We had a weird service called The Bridge. And we had a service at night. And I remember begging to go to that classic service and thank those who are 55 and older. Because as we were reaching 20-somethings, we were reaching it on their shoulders. If it wasn't for them laying a foundation of what Faith Church was and leaning in and putting the walls up, literally, we wouldn't have had what we had. And I think that's the same here. So Paul is walking and waiting, and he's greatly distressed to see that the city is filled with idols. And facing a threat to his safety, he's moved from Bereas from some believers. He comes to Athens alone, and he witnesses this idol worship. And so for those of you who are maybe outside of 22, let me just ask you this. In some way, no different than today, where is it that you truly must trust God day in and day out? When 3 to 4 billion people on the planet are trusting God to meet their next need, their next meal, their next whatever. Where is it for us when we've got a place to live and a car to drive and friends around us and family who care about us? For those of us who are Eagles fans, we enjoyed a Super Bowl win 5 years ago. Right? Like where is it that I have to put my trust in God? So you know where it is? I don't know how I got to what I do. But I will tell you, whatever work comes out of the Center Consulting Group, if it's good because God showed up in ways that we could have never imagined. And I believe that this church is uniquely poised to experience that same thing. Francis Chan said it this way. He said, our greatest fear should not be of failure, but of succeeding in things at life that really don't matter. Like, great, you've built a great business. awesome. Look at all the accolades on your wall. But if you're succeeding in things that really have no tangible kingdom impact, what good is that? How does that really translate to the kingdom? So if you are 65 and older, this church and God's people need you now. They need your wisdom more than ever. If you're married with kids, if you're married without kids, this community needs to see a humble and growing marriage. If you're a business owner, the business community needs to see your ethics modeled in great ways. If you're a teenager, you enter into the greatest mission field the world has ever seen today, tomorrow, next week, whether it's homeschool, Christian school, public school, online school, your friends, your neighbors, the things that they're trying to convince you of, it is a battle. If you're a woman, your leadership and your voice matters now more than ever. If you've been broken, far from God, disobedient, or faced addiction, your story is needed right now. Why? Because out of this season comes incredible possibility. So take a look at verse 17. So Paul arrives, he's distressed. So what happens? He becomes a church preacher and a street preacher. Look at what verse 17 says. It says, so he reasoned in the synagogue with both the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks. That's like the church side, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happen to be there. That's more like the street side. The marketplace was really described as the agora, A-G-O-R-A. And this is the place in Athens that was kind of an enclosed space where civic and religious and political and commercial and social life issues were discussed. So people would sit around for hours talking about a variety of different things. In the local church today, do you know where that happens most? That happens most in the hallways, where I run into a couple that I've not seen in a couple weeks. We're holding a cup of coffee and we kind of get to do life together. So I kind of wonder, where is your marketplace? So when Paul says that he's reasoning in the synagogue with the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace, basically, Paul went to where the people were. So what is it for you? Is it your neighborhood, your work? Is it being on Zoom? Is it a sports team, the lunch table, a home? Is it with your friends, with your kids? Is it in the lobby? I begin to ask myself, what is it that I'm doing? Where is my marketplace that's beyond the work that we do with churches and nonprofits and sometimes businesses led by Christian owners? Like, where is my marketplace outside of that? In verse 9, it says, in verse 18, of Acts chapter 17, it says, a group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Some of them asked, what is this babbler trying to say? Others remarked, he seems to be advocating foreign gods. They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Now, if you know 1 Corinthians at all, in 1 Corinthians 15:14, they've already connected to the resurrection. But in that verse it says, and if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is our faith. There was something so uniquely tied to this concept of who Jesus was, his death, burial, and his resurrection. It's why in 5 months after Christmas, we will gather together on March 31st and we will celebrate Easter. Why? Because Jesus Christ has been risen from the dead. And that's what Paul says here. He says, they said this because Paul was preaching what? The good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Or as I like to say it this way, if you do not have Jesus Christ, you are eternally under-resourced. Now, it's important to understand that the Epicureans were fascinated with happiness and pleasure. That was their main pursuit. Whereas the Stoics, their doctrine was more around pride and orderliness and dignity. So you've got these two different groups that are coming like in opposite directions, trying to navigate this message that Paul is giving them. And so what does he do? Well, I think it's intriguing that and ironic that Paul was teaching the basics of theology who were worldwide known as intellectual supremes. So in 1 Corinthians 1:25, when it says this, the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. That's what they were trying to kind of reconcile in their minds. What is it that they're talking about? So verses 19 and 20, it says, so then they brought him to the meeting of the Areopagus. Now this is where like the heavy hitters are, right? And they said to him, may we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting. You are bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we would like to know what they mean. Have you ever met somebody where they're just so far from God that they couldn't even articulate some of the basic concepts of Christianity? They probably couldn't tell you who Daniel and David is. They're not really sure of the story of Jesus. They know we celebrate it on Christmas Day. That's kind of what's happening here. They're saying to Paul in a really legit meeting, like, you are bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we would like to know what they mean. Now, here's what's interesting about Athens. You remember how many people I said were in Athens at this time? About 10,000 people. If you read through the history books, you'll find that they estimate that there were more than 10,000 idols in the city. So you could not walk a block in Athens and not see an idol on the floor, not see an idol in a window, not see an idol built at the center square. Everywhere you turn, I meet a person, I see an idol. I meet a person, I see two idols. And so Paul is coming to them and he's saying, yes, I would be more than happy to share this with you. For me, this was a great example of how possibility happens. So in addition to my role at the center, I also do campus ministry at Lehigh University. And so I work primarily with student athletes. And 6 years ago when I started that work, it was the hardest 6 months of ministry my wife and I ever had. Lehigh is not a Christian college. It's where C.J. McCollum went. We beat Duke 5 years ago or 6 years ago, blah, blah, blah. But it's got competitive basketball. And 6 months in, a woman who is one of the senior athletic administrators who had lost her husband and was a believer, she came to me and she said, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to do our wedding. I'm getting remarried because the person I'm remarrying, he lost his wife, I lost my husband, and we're getting married. I was like, sure, I'd be happy to. Well, wouldn't you know, that late Friday afternoon comes, Packer Chapel, and the historic chapel on the campus of Lehigh University. And when I walk up and I start to do that, it wasn't just one or two people from the athletic department. It was every coach. It was 400 strong in that athletic community. And I thought in that moment, you know, you've had 6 hard months, and God has given you an opportunity. He's created possibility that you could have never created. And in that 30-minute ceremony that people still come to me and talk about, for 10 minutes I just preached the gospel. I preached the gospel in such a convicting way that the guy who is in charge of all of athletics said to me afterwards, he said, well, if I have to get remarried again, I know who I'm going to ask. And then 3 months later, he said, I'd like to meet with you, and we're going to give you a small office. I kid you not, it's basically a refurbished closet. You cannot get a full desk in there. And we're going to give you an ID and an email, and we'd love for you to take whatever you're doing and move it as much across the campus. You just have to make sure it's voluntary. Can I just tell you, I could have never scripted that. That would have never come under what I was thinking, but God did it. God did it in an amazing way. And now the ministry that is moving through Lehigh is unlike anything I've seen, and I have done nothing to deserve it. That to me is the wonder of possibility. So when you look at what Paul is doing, and he's about to bring some strange ideas that they want to know about, it's significant. So take a look at verses 22 and 23. It says, so Paul stands up in this meeting. He says, people of Athens, your translation might say men of Athens, because most of the people there were men. He says, I see that in every way you are very religious. He connects to like the spiritual connotation of where they are. He says, for as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. You know, they were so paranoid that they were going to miss a God of love, a God of food, a God of this, a God of safety, that they even had gods that were kind of for the unknown God in case we forgot one. And he even mentions that. You see the careful detail. He's walking around, he's looking carefully so that he can come and say, look, you guys even have an unknown God. And as what you describe as unknown, I am going to proclaim to you. I'm going to share with you the good news. Paul connected with them through their religion, their pursuit of God, little g. He followed his conviction of adapting to the people he was seeking to reach, and he met them where they were in their thinking. And the work that we do at the center is no different. There's no template, there's no cookie cutter. We don't just apply the same principles. Every church is different. Every church culture is different. The DNA of a church is different. And we have to come in and do an amazing amount of learning so that we can now apply the things that we've learned so that possibility can move forward. And if I were to ask anything of you, and nobody's paid me to say this, we get paid a salary no matter what, can I ask you, don't run from this season. Don't leave in this season, because out of this season, I truly believe, and we see it time after time after time in the churches that we work with, incredible opportunity comes. Kingdom advancement comes through these hard moments that you'll be able to look back on and celebrate. Will it be easy? No. Or is there still heavy lifting? Of course. But God is going to work. So he walks around and he looks at what's happening and he understands them on a personal level. And take a look at verses 24 and 25. This to me is kind of like the thesis. It's the summary. If you remember nothing else about what I shared, remember this passage right here. It says in Acts chapter 17, verses 24 and 25, and this is Paul speaking to the men of the Areopagus, the leaders of Athens, the leaders of the world. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth. And he does not live in temples built by human hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Here's what it means. You know, this building could go away. We were working with a church like 2 years ago where somebody had torched their church and it burnt to the ground. And guess what? They gathered together that next Sunday because the church is not the building, it's not the walls, it's not your great foyer. The church is the people, it's the ecclesia, it's those who have been called out by God. It's you. It's the person to your right and to your left. It's the person who's been here for 37 years, and it's the person who's been there this week. And if you're here this week for the first time, I am really sorry. Okay, we get back to regular programming next week. But this is kind of what Paul is saying. He's saying the God who made the world, like everything, is the Lord of heaven and earth. And he doesn't need it. But the thesis statement is that last sentence. Take a look at it. But rather, it is God who gives everyone life and breath and everything else. Paul began to explain to these pagan intellectuals that the God who made the world and everything in it, is the true and living Lord of heaven and earth. He explained that such a great God does not dwell in temples which are made by men, which these guys began to get. He pointed out that the God of heaven and earth does not dwell in these places. He dwells in our hearts. And it's that God who gives all men life and breath and everything else. That is a worthy endeavor. That is worth pointing people to. A freedom that comes through Jesus Christ. This is the words that Paul is describing. This is the words that Paul is proclaiming, that there is a God who made the world and everything in it. And it is he who gives all men life and breath and everything else. Would you agree with me that that really does a good job of summarizing what God offers to us? The very breath that we take, the very life that we live, and the purpose by which we live it. You know, growing up as a kid in a single-parent family has some real uniquenesses to it. People often ask me, I'm finishing a book on kind of what that journey was like, because in 9th grade, I remember opening the fridge and the only two things left in our fridge were a half-used bottle of vinegar and some old celery. That's where we had gotten, and I knew in 9th grade that I didn't know in like 6th grade that we had hit rock bottom. There was nowhere else to go. When the only two food items in your fridge for the next 2 days are celery and vinegar, it's going to be a tough couple days. And I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. I wouldn't trade what those years were like, because it's given me context to the way that I live today. And yet, at the age of 26, I had to come face to face with the skills that you learn, the survival instincts that you learn having to scrape things together and find ways to just get your next meal. Those same instincts that allowed some of what we did to survive through middle school and high school actually became the very shadows that were about to train wreck my career. And a friend of mine, interestingly enough, who is not a Christian to even today, came to me at 26 very directly, and he basically just said, if you don't change some things, you are going to train wreck your career and there was nothing terrible. I was living actually in shame. Shame was like constantly nipping at my heels. And I spent that next year really pursuing what God had truly wanted, and he freed me from that. And it took somebody else to recognize that I never want to be satisfied with where I am in my own spiritual growth. I never want to be content whether I'm a teenager or an adult or I'm married, I'm far from God. I never want to be satisfied. I want to be cultivating an insatiability for more of God by examining my weaknesses, beholding the perfection of Christ, and finding good examples of strength that I want to develop. My prayer is that as we see Paul go through the same thing, the difficulties in Thessalonica, the difficulties in Berea, being whisked away to Athens, arriving there, 10,000 people, more idols than actual people. And he has the opportunity to say to them, it is the God who gives everyone life and breath and everything else. So, what does it mean? The wonder of possibility starts first in my heart. That we must embrace the burden that God is stirring in your heart. I can't imagine he's not stirring in some way. I can't imagine there's not something that's going on that you ask yourself, okay, Lord, what is it that you have for me in this? So here's my encouragement, and it's going to come right from what Paul did. Number one, walk well. Allow the way in which you walk in Christ to be something that is done well. Not perfect, because that's impossible, but done well. Number two, reason often. Find ways and nuances to bring your faith into conversations, to share the gospel with people. And then be a person who points others to the one who gives men all life and all breath and everything else. And if we do that, God is going to do amazing things. Let's pray together. God, I thank you for this time. Thank you for this text. Thank you for the way that we see Paul living through possibility. God, I wish I had time to kind of know each story in this room. But I have to believe that there are some stories that are close to you right now. God, there are some stories that may feel far away, and yet you meet us in those places and you create possibility out of impossible circumstances. God, I know firsthand what that was like. I watched you work firsthand. Some of the greatest work that you've done in all of our lives have been done in hardship, and it gives us opportunities to point away to where you're headed. God, thank you for River Oaks. Thank you for the way in which they have a desire to reach Elkhart County, to reach the state of Indiana, to be influencers of the kingdom around the world. God, may you use this time to bring pruning and to do what Paul said, to point people back to the one who gives men all life and breath and everything else. In Christ's name, amen.